So today I wanted to make a slightly different video from talking about finance and talk about a home bathroom renovation that I've been working on. I thought it would be helpful to make a video talking about general advice and tips that I've learned coming from somebody who has absolutely no experience on bathroom renovations, and talk about some great resources to learn a little bit more, and also so that others can learn from some of the mistakes I made. And even if you have no experience like myself, I generally recommend people learn or at least consider tacking on a bathroom renovation project, even if you hire out some of the major steps to pros, because you will learn valuable skills throughout, and on top of that there are huge savings throughout the process even if you just do some of the small steps. And I'll talk about the general time frame on how long it's taken me so far. It's taken a considerable amount of time and I'm still not necessarily done with the project quite yet, but I'll do a more detailed explanation video on exactly how many days it took, as well as the things that I felt like it was worth paying more of a premium for, and things that I didn't necessarily think were worth splurging for that maybe I would have regretted it and maybe I actually would change that decision now. So if you're interested in that, you're going to want to make sure you're subscribed to stay tuned for that. So to start on why I even started the renovation in the first place, nothing was terribly wrong with my bathroom, but there were some parts that were old, like the shower door, or some parts that had become a little bit discolored or beginning to deteriorate a little bit. In general, I think it's pretty important for people to have a general purpose on why they're renovating something, whether it's because they actually need to or whether there's certain things that they just want to renovate. Because if you're like me, you watch HGTV a few times and you think, this seems pretty easy, I could do it myself with no experience, and then it turns out to be a lot more difficult. So what started off as actually needing to change a few parts eventually turned into thinking, why not just change out the whole entire bathroom and do a complete bathroom renovation with no experience? And this turned out to be a little bit of a financial mistake, only because I generally was coming from the perspective of needing to change a few things, but then pushed into these things that I just wanted to. So every single time I paid a little bit more for those things that I wanted to, it was a little bit of a financial pain every single time I had to do that, versus having the perspective or the expectation off the bat that I don't need to change anything in the bathroom, but I want to change and do a whole entire bathroom renovation. At least I have that expectation, so I know to budget for that, versus coming from this perspective of only budgeting for the things I needed and then end up pushing beyond that, and so there was more of a financial pain at the end of it. So if you want to make the whole entire bathroom renovation process a lot more enjoyable, I definitely recommend right off the bat deciding on what things you actually need and what things you actually want, and budgeting likewise on that and having that expectation. Now, probably at the root of this video, as far as understanding how to do a bathroom renovation with little to no experience and where to find that information, the probably best place to start is here on YouTube. Now, you're probably going to find this out on your own, but I'm going to at least save you the trouble and tell you that there's a million different ways to do the exact same type of renovation, and there's a million different people that are very opinionated, or some people not necessarily so opinionated, on how to do those renovations. So while there are certainly some people that respect all different methods on doing a renovation, there are some people that are so opinionated or just feel a certain way about a renovation that they end up calling other channels hacks, or they call other channels or other people out there hacks or amateurs, and they're not necessarily doing it the proper way. These channels will kind of have little subtle jabs onto other channels, basically doing a renovation video on something specific like how to change a toilet, and at the end of it say, you know, I felt the need to make this video because no other channel out there has done it the proper way, so I thought I needed to do it myself. And it's kind of like a little subtle way on saying that nobody out there is doing it the right way. And while in some cases that is certainly true, that there are channels that are hacks out there that aren't necessarily doing things the proper way, the way I feel it is kind of the same way I feel about finance. At the end of the day, there's no one size fits all when it comes to finance. You know, you have to kind of adjust things based on your specific needs and who you are as a person and what your specific goals are. You know, the same is true when it comes to bathroom renovations. You know, you think about doing a shower remodel, there's people out there that will do it, that will last, 15 to 20 years. And then there's other people that say, I'll show you the proper way that will actually last 80 to 100 years and that will last the lifetime of the house. And this is the right way to do it. Well, the thing is you don't necessarily know if that person has the expectation that they're going to be moving out of the house 5 to 10 years. So 15 to 20 years is good enough for them. Especially when you consider that some of these top tier ways as far as doing the renovations end up having premium tools or premium materials that end up costing a little bit more. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing either. You can do a bathroom renovation that lasts lifetime of the house if that's your goal. But I just wanted to generally point this out so that way you can kind of tailor these different channels. You know, I encourage everybody to watch a variety of different channels, and you'll quickly find channels that you end up liking the person, or maybe you like the way that they film things, or you like the more technical people that really get into the science of how different things work. But I felt the need to point this out, especially if you have no experience or little to no experience on doing bathroom renovations, because if you end up reading these comments like I did, you see on every single channel that everybody out there is saying that this is the wrong way to do do it. And then you end up thinking to yourself, well, it seems like nobody's doing it the right way. So how do I do it? Well, at the end of the day, it's just kind of a preference thing to a degree. There are certainly wrong ways to do things. You know, if you're installing a shower and there's a leak right away, that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. I kind of view this the same way that people really hate Dave Ramsey because Dave Ramsey swears against credit cards. Credit cards can be great and beneficial to some people, some it won't work. The one potential problem that you might run into is that these bigger channels tend to focus on bigger topics, right? So they're going to talk about how to change out a basic toilet, but they won't talk about it from your specific setting. Maybe you have a special type of fitting or type of pipe that they won't necessarily cover. Which brings me to my next point, which is to use forums, and especially these builder type forums, for these very specific or type technical questions. Now I'll go over some of these forums, especially the ones that I tend to think are best for bathroom renovation type advice. But I mean, there's tons of forums out there. There's millions. There's some covering HVAC, some covering electrical, some covering even just basic framing, or even more technical than just that. Some good ones for general questions would be Builders Talk or Contractors Talk. These forums, especially John Bridge, are a great resource because they typically have questions already asked as far as people that are first-time renovators that are trying to figure out what to do. And on top of that, they have a lot of pros and retired pros that really contribute a great deal of wealth of information that are going to be very valuable to you. Personally, I like these forums, especially John Bridge, because a lot of people tend to keep it pretty light. They give you your information, the question that you're asking, but on top of that, they may include a joke or two, or at least they just are generally not that hostile. But if you do want a resource that is more hostile for whatever reason, you could go to Reddit. The two subreddits I would recommend are Home Improvement and DIY. Those are great resources as far as subreddits that you can ask questions or where do I begin type questions. The only problem you may run into is people being a little hostile as far as you ask a question and they say that you clearly are way in over your head, you don't know what you're doing, do more research, hire a pro. Those questions or those comments, generally just ignore those. But what these subreddits are good for is asking general information or input. Plenty of people on Reddit, definitely, especially on the internet as a whole, love to give input and say what they recommend and what they don't recommend. So personally, what I did is I actually asked questions on there, generally asking, what are features in a bathroom that you found really useful, that improved your day-to-day life, and what features did you include in your renovation that you didn't like? Some of the general recommendations that a lot of people upvoted and really enjoyed were things like improving your exhaust fan, which I did do and has greatly changed my life. Adding a dimmer, a lot of people like to have timers on the exhaust fan. That's something I didn't necessarily feel to include because mine has a motion sensor, but having a dimmer is definitely very beneficial because especially late at night, you don't necessarily want to have full brightness on your lights, but you also, want to be able to see where you're going. Two other really popular recommendations was one, if you're converting your flooring to tile, then they would really recommend having heated flooring. That's something I didn't necessarily feel that was necessary. And on top of that, because I was doing it myself, I felt like it wasn't something I felt totally comfortable doing. And then the second big recommendation that a lot of people were in favor for was a bidet. That was something that, once again, I didn't necessarily think I was, going to need anytime soon. So it was something that I didn't necessarily opt for. Now, what I would say that these subreddits aren't necessarily good for is very detailed oriented question. Like I said, go to the professional forums. Those are usually a better resource. But on top of that, even if you provide detailed pictures and a detailed explanation on what you're doing, it's very difficult for people to give advice because in the end, local building codes are, locally based. And on top of that, as far as things for resale value, that's also local based. So it's really hard for people, from New York to give recommendations on people based in Florida. Speaking of building codes, I know a lot of people, especially with no experience, that are thinking about doing a bathroom renovation themselves, generally think about is whether or not to get permits. And what I'm going to say here may be controversial, and I think a lot of people would actually kind of agree, but won't necessarily admit it. If you decide to do renovation work that does require a permit, you would not be the first person to do unpermitted work. So as long as you understand the risks that you're taking, I would say it probably is something you could do, but no one's going to officially recommend, especially a pro, because no one wants to be held liable for that. On top of that, I kind of look at it the same way that a doctor would recommend, they're going to recommend the best medical things for you to do, but they won't necessarily do it themselves. That's kind of the same principle here. As a pro is not necessarily going to recommend that you don't get a permit. In general, anyways, when it comes to bathroom renovations, most of the stuff is cosmetic anyways, and pretty basic as far as, dealing with the plumbing or dealing with electrical work. If you feel comfortable changing out a light fixture, or you feel comfortable, let's say, changing a water faucet, then generally all the work you're going to end up doing is basically at that same level. You know, there are some places out there that technically you are legally supposed to have a permit just to change out a light fixture or to change out, you know, a light switch from a regular switch to a dimmer switch. And so all that type of work actually has to be permitted, but those are such basic things that even a pro that you're going to hire won't necessarily always get a permit. What I mean is, from an individual contractor's perspective, if you're hiring an electrician to just basically install one additional light bulb, they may not necessarily actually want to pull a permit, because the time consumed as far as actually getting an inspector to come out and inspect this one light bulb is generally not necessarily worth it for them, or you're going to have to pay a pretty high premium just for that one light. So that's kind of why sometimes it's beneficial, if you're going to actually hire a pro to do something, have them actually do a lot of work. So if you're going to hire somebody to do one light bulb, have them do as many light bulbs as possible throughout the whole entire house, if that's something you're actually looking for. And also, when it comes to hiring a pro, if getting a permit is something you actually do care about, you know, that's something you're going to want to make sure that you explicitly ask and actually verify. So you're actually going to want to have proof that they actually pulled that permit, because in some cases, some people will actually claim that they will pull a permit, but they won't necessarily do that. And for those severely worried about doing work to themselves and, you know, doing a bathroom renovation without a permit, what I would also say, even besides the fact that most of it is pretty much cosmetic, is especially if you're going to be living in the house for the next 5 to 10 years, it's something I personally probably wouldn't worry too much, because it's basically doing work on your own house. If you're doing work for somebody else and you're not pulling a permit and you have no experience, I don't know why you're doing that. But if you're doing it for your own house, then that's something I generally wouldn't worry too much about, especially because if you really messed up pretty bad, you know, like something in the plumbing that actually is going to cause a leak down the road, that leak is going to be, you know, seen within the next, you know, couple of years anyways, if you didn't necessarily do it right. And there are certainly going to be people that completely disagree with that and say you always have to pull a permit, hire a pro, whatever. That's, you know, once again, this is just my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. And as far as experience needed to complete a bathroom renovation, especially if you have no experience, what I would say here is, you know, as long as you can hold a hammer, which is basically all my knowledge, then as long as you can also Google and YouTube search different things, then you're pretty much going to be in a good place. Obviously, the trade-off here when you have no experience is that it's going to require additional time. So as long as you take the extra steps to really make sure, you know, don't just watch one video on how to, you know, install a light fixture. Watch multiple different videos so you actually have a real good understanding, so that way you don't mess it up. But at the end of the day, one of the things you have to really accept is that because you're not a pro and you have no experience, there's a good chance that everything you do is not necessarily going to be 100% perfect. But the same could be said, even if you hire a pro, you know, there's chances that there's just, you know, something that they messed up on and it's not necessarily 100% perfect either. So just hiring a pro doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get perfection either. And also there's kind of this question as far as time expectations. But what I would say here is, at the very least, basically double the time frame you're expecting. If you're thinking it's going to take 1 month, just double it so that way you have that mental expectation. But the second thing I would say is basically expect something to go wrong. Hopefully it happens not necessarily at the very beginning of your project like it did with me, but in general, there's a very good chance that there's something special or unique about your house that the renovation doesn't necessarily happen as smoothly as possible. If you watch any of these renovation videos on YouTube, how to do something, they generally have it in the best scenario possible. But there's a good chance that the fitting that you have that fits to a pipe or a plumbing pipe or something like that isn't necessarily the exact one that you saw them do, so then it ends up taking you a little bit longer. As far as to give some perspective on my timetable, maybe that might help you make your decisions, I actually took a week off, but what I was able to accomplish in that time was basically very little, because I ran into some issues that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Basically, there's a lot more plumbing work that had to be done to convert my fiberglass shower to a tile shower. But after about that week, and I would say about 4 other weekends worth of work, I'm pretty much almost about like 80-90% done. I do have to tile the shower, but in general, I'm pretty much, you know, almost done as far as, you know, the vanities and the toilets and the tile flooring is done. So I'm pretty close, but obviously tiling the shower is, you know, it's probably actually going to take a little bit longer than I expect. Obviously, the major consideration when you're considering your timetable and what to expect, you know, just assume that everything is going to take way longer than you think. Even just one little small step, like, you know, something as simple as just changing out the faucet fixture. You know, maybe there's a good chance that the way your vanity is set up doesn't actually fit properly, or maybe the actual shower faucet you want is not necessarily in stock at the store you wanted, so you have to go a little bit further to, you know, find the one you actually want. Those types of things just end up adding time because it's an additional trip to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever your choice store is. So that's definitely something to consider, is even though when you're planning, these things may seem simple, you watch enough YouTube videos to understand it, it may actually end up being a lot longer than you think. So what I highly recommend here is, like I said, double the time frame and make sure that you have some other kind of accommodations to account for that. You know, if you have an additional shower, that's definitely going to be useful, especially for tiling a shower. If not, then what I would recommend here, even though it's going to kind of end up being a little bit longer, is to basically do your renovation section by section. So, you know, change out the flooring, you know, convert it to tile if that's what you're interested in, and, you know, try to keep the shower still intact. And then once you're actually ready to, you know, change the shower and you've already done the flooring, then you can actually do the shower. And, you know, there's a lot of question too as far as what's the step-by-step process, where do I begin? You know, in general, most people would start with the shower, but it is possible to start with the flooring and then do the, you know, tiling for the shower. You know, as far as things on the wall too, that's kind of a step that you could kind of go either way. You know, for example, if I change the flooring first and then decide to paint the walls, that's acceptable, but the problem is you may spill some paint on the new tiling. All that hard work is lost. But at the same time, there's scenarios where you have the tile already selected, ordered, delivered, so you're ready to install that, but you're not necessarily, you haven't decided yet on what paint color you want to do. So it would be acceptable in some cases to install the tiling first and then paint later. So here are my final thoughts as far as doing a home renovation or bathroom renovation yourself with little to no experience. I generally recommend everybody at least attempt, you know, even small steps, because if you can just do little small things here and there, like change out the mirror yourself or change out the vanity yourself, there are huge savings to that versus having to hire a pro do the whole entire bathroom renovation themselves. Plus, there are general skills that you can end up learning and feeling better about, so that way down the road, you don't necessarily have to have a pro come out and do something. For example, maybe you end up changing the faucet fixtures yourself, so that gives you the confidence to change out the little toilet valve, the valve that goes in the back that shuts off the water, turns it on. You know, that toilet valve is somewhere that leaks typically, and people have to hire a pro just to come out and fix that one little thing, and it ends up costing them $100. But if you do that yourself, that's $20. So that's $80 saved with probably 1 to 2 hours max. So you can kind of think about it, $80 saved, 2 hours worth of work. That's $40 an hour you're paying yourself. If you have any additional questions or comments and you're feeling a little bit iffy on whether or not to tackle a bathroom renovation on your own, you know, coming from somebody with no experience, feel free to comment down below and I'd be more than happy to respond. Or at least I can give you a great resource that may give you that confidence and knowledge to tackle on that project yourself. And like I said, if you want a full detailed breakdown as far as the actual cost, things I, you know, paid a premium for, and the overall timeline, make sure to subscribe so you can stay tuned for that. And if you like personal finance, business, or anything like that, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next one.